My name is Allison, and I'm 32. I'm standing in my kitchen, staring at the latest text from my sister Megan. Mom says you're being dramatic again about the family dinner thing. Just got done scrubbing crayon marks off the wall. Again. While my son Ethan does homework at the table. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt like the family disappointment. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me back up and tell you how I became the designated family failure. In the Morgan family hierarchy, I've always occupied the most thankless position. While everyone else seemed to effortlessly meet my mother Janice's impossible standards, I somehow always fell short. Megan, my younger sister, mastered the art of being everything our mother wanted. Married to a successful businessman, 2 perfect children, active in all the right social circles. Allison just doesn't have your drive, honey, I overheard Mom telling Megan last Christmas. I was in the kitchen loading their dishes into my dishwasher, because naturally, hosting family dinner had somehow become my responsibility despite being the unsuccessful one. After my husband David died in that car accident 3 years ago, you'd think my family might have shown some understanding. Instead, they seemed to view my widowhood as confirmation of my general inability to maintain anything properly. If she'd been more supportive of David's career, Megan once whispered to our cousin, maybe he wouldn't have been working so late that night. The truth is, I've been carrying this family's expectations on my shoulders while raising Ethan completely alone. I work full-time as a project manager at a consulting firm, make sure Ethan gets to every school activity, help with homework, manage doctor appointments, and somehow still find time to show up for every family gathering where I'm treated like the hired help. Ethan feels the tension too. At 8 years old, he's already figured out that Uncle Brad and Aunt Megan don't really like spending time with him. Their kids, Madison and Tyler, are encouraged to see themselves as superior to my poor fatherless boy. Last month at Madison's birthday party, I watched Ethan sit alone while the other kids played, because someone had told him he couldn't join their game. "Why don't they like us, Mom?" he asked on the drive home, his voice small and confused. How do you explain to your child that some people enjoy feeling superior to others? That his grandmother sees him as evidence of my life's failures rather than the incredible little person he actually is? The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was making Ethan's lunch. My boss needed me in New York immediately. Our biggest client was threatening to pull their contract, and I was the only one who could salvage the relationship. 3 days, maybe 4 at most. I can't just drop everything, I told him, watching Ethan practice spelling words at the breakfast table. Allison, this account represents 30% of our revenue. If we lose them, I understood. My job was the one stable thing in our lives. Without it, Ethan and I would be in real trouble. But leaving him meant asking my family for help, and that always came with a price. Just call your mother, my friend Sarah suggested when I vented to her. What's the worst that could happen? I could have laughed at her innocence. Sarah's family actually liked each other. The phone call to Mom went exactly as I expected. "Oh, Allison, this is such short notice," she sighed, her voice carrying that familiar note of inconvenience. "Megan and I already have plans this week. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't an emergency. It's just 3 days. Well, I suppose we can manage. Suppose we can. Though I do think you need to consider whether this job is really suitable for a single mother. All this traveling," I bit my tongue, hard. This was the first business trip I'd taken in 2 years, but somehow I was already being painted as an absentee parent. "Ethan can stay in David's old room," she continued. "But you'll need to pack everything he might need. And I mean everything, Allison. I don't have time to run to the store for things you've forgotten." "Of course. Thank you, Mom. And make sure he understands he needs to be on his best behavior. Megan's children will be there some of the time, and I won't have him disrupting their routines." I found Ethan in his room, building an elaborate fort out of couch cushions and blankets. His face fell when I explained I had to go away for work. "Can I come with you?" he asked, the way he always did when faced with staying with my family. "I'm sorry, buddy. This is boring work stuff, but it's only a few days." He nodded, trying to be brave, but I saw his shoulders slump. Ethan was intuitive enough to sense the difference between my family's polite tolerance and actual warmth. At his friend Marcus's house, adults asked him questions about school and listened to his answers. At Grandma's house, he was expected to remain quietly invisible. Packing his bag felt like preparing him for battle. Extra clothes in case someone decided his weren't clean enough. His favorite books, though I knew he'd probably be too nervous to read, the small stuffed elephant David had given him as a baby, hidden at the bottom where my mother wouldn't see it and make comments about 8-year-olds needing to grow up. "Remember what we practiced," I told him as we drove to Mom's house. "Use your inside voice, clean up after yourself, and if anything feels wrong, you call me immediately." "What if they don't let me call you?" The question stopped me cold. What kind of family dynamics had I normalized that my 8-year-old son would even think to ask that? "They'll let you call me," I said, hoping it was true. Mom's house looked picture-perfect as always. The lawn manicured, the flowers arranged with mathematical precision. Megan's SUV was already in the driveway, which meant Madison and Tyler were probably already holding court in the living room. "Now remember," Mom said as we stood at her front door, "Ethan will need to share the playroom with the other children. I've explained to them that he might not understand all their games." Ethan's hand tightened in mine. At 8, he understood perfectly well when adults talked about him like he wasn't there. "Ethan's very good with other children," I said firmly, "and he's looking forward to spending time with his cousins." The look Mom gave me suggested this was another example of my delusional thinking about my son's capabilities. The goodbye was worse than I'd anticipated. Ethan hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, and when I tried to let go, his arms stayed locked around my neck. "I love you more than the whole universe," I whispered, our special phrase. "More than the whole universe plus infinity," he whispered back, his voice thick with unshed tears. Walking away from him felt like tearing off part of my own skin, but I had to trust that for 3 days, my family could provide basic care and kindness to one small boy. I had to trust that blood meant something. My flight to New York was turbulent, which felt appropriate given the sick feeling in my stomach. I'd left my child with people who saw him as a burden rather than a gift. But what choice did I have? New York was a blur of conference rooms, client dinners, and damage control. The client, a major retail chain, had legitimate concerns about our timeline projections, but I managed to restructure the deliverables in a way that satisfied everyone. By Thursday afternoon, what should have been a crisis had turned into an opportunity to strengthen our relationship. "Brilliant work, Allison," my boss said as we walked out of the final meeting. "I knew sending you was the right call." I should have felt proud. Instead, I felt anxious to get home to Ethan. My text to Mom had been answered with minimal responses. Tuesday. "How's Ethan doing?" "Fine." Wednesday. "Is he eating okay?" "Yes." Thursday morning. "Can I talk to him tonight?" "He's busy with the other children." The responses were so brief they felt almost hostile. But maybe that was just Mom's texting style, right? She'd never been much for phone communication. Thursday evening, I tried calling. No answer. I called again an hour later. "Allison, we're in the middle of dinner." Mom's voice was clipped. "Is this urgent?" "I just wanted to say goodnight to Ethan. He's already brushing his teeth. I'll tell him you called." The call ended before I could ask any follow-up questions. A cold anxiety started building in my chest. This felt wrong. Mom might be emotionally distant, but she'd never actively prevented me from talking to my son before. I called Megan's cell phone. "Hey, just checking in on Ethan." Mom seemed rushed when I called. "Oh, he's fine, playing with Madison and Tyler. You know how kids are when they get together. Can I talk to him real quick?" "Actually, they're all in the bathtub right now. Maybe tomorrow?" 2 conversations, 2 different explanations for why I couldn't speak to my son. The anxiety was turning into something sharper, more urgent. Friday morning, I made a decision that probably saved everything. The client meetings had gone better than expected, and I could catch an earlier flight home. Instead of staying for the planned Friday evening dinner, I booked myself on a 2 p.m. flight that would get me back by evening. I didn't tell my family I was coming home early. Something, maybe intuition, maybe growing paranoia, told me I needed to see what was really happening. The flight felt endless. I kept thinking about Ethan's face when I'd left him, the way his shoulders had slumped, his question about whether they'd let him call me. My son had instincts about people that were usually accurate. Why hadn't I trusted them? By the time I landed and got my car from airport parking, it was almost 7 p.m. The drive to Mom's house took another 40 minutes, during which I talked myself in and out of calling ahead. Part of me wanted to give them a chance to explain whatever was happening. A larger part of me suspected that advance warning would mean I'd never learn the truth. As I turned onto Mom's familiar street, I could hear something that stopped my blood cold. Music. Loud music. The kind that meant a party was happening. Cars lined the driveway and spilled onto the street. Through the front windows, I could see people moving around, wine glasses in hand, the warm glow of celebration. A party. My family was throwing a party while watching my son, and they hadn't mentioned it. They'd made it sound like a quiet few days with the grandchildren, but this was clearly a planned social event. I sat in my car for a moment, trying to process what I was seeing. Where was Ethan? Was he upstairs, listening to adults enjoy themselves while he felt excluded? Was he wondering why I hadn't called? The sick feeling in my stomach was getting worse by the second. I parked down the street and walked back toward the house, my heart pounding with each step. The front door was propped open to accommodate the flow of guests, and I could see clearly into the foyer and living room. At least 20 people were scattered throughout the space, all adults, all clearly enjoying themselves. No children in sight. I walked around to the side of the house and let myself in through the garage, using the spare key I'd had since high school. The mudroom was quiet, insulated from the party noise, but I could hear the music and conversation filtering down from above. "Mom?" I called softly. No response. I started toward the main house, intending to find Ethan and quietly ask what was going on. That's when I heard it. A sound that made my blood turn to ice. Crying. Faint, muffled crying coming from somewhere below me. The basement. The sound was coming from the basement. My hands shook as I found the basement door and pulled it open. The stairway was dark, but the crying was clearer now. A child's voice, weak and desperate, calling out, "Mommy? Mommy? Please." I nearly fell down the stairs in my rush to get to him. "Ethan," I called out, flipping on the light switch. The basement was finished but rarely used, containing old furniture and storage boxes. In the far corner, huddled behind a stack of cardboard boxes, I found my son. Ethan was curled into a ball on the concrete floor, still wearing the clothes I'd dressed him in 3 days ago, now wrinkled and stained. He was shivering. The basement was cold and damp, and he had no blanket, no jacket. When he looked up and saw me, his face crumpled with relief and fresh sobs. "Mommy!" He scrambled toward me, and I caught him in my arms, feeling how cold his little body was, how he trembled against me. "Baby, what are you doing down here? Why are you in the basement?" Through his tears, the story came out in broken pieces. He'd been too loud during lunch yesterday. Megan had said he was disrupting the peace. Mom had decided he needed to learn some self-control and put him down here for a little while. That was yesterday. He'd been locked in the basement for over 24 hours. While my family threw a party upstairs, my 8-year-old son was imprisoned in a cold, dark basement, calling for his mother with no one listening. The rage that filled me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was clean and cold and absolutely certain. I picked up Ethan, who wrapped his arms and legs around me like a monkey, still crying into my shoulder. "We're leaving," I whispered to him. "Right now." I carried him up the basement stairs, through the mudroom, and straight toward the party sounds. I was done hiding, done being polite, done protecting these people's feelings while they destroyed my child. The conversation in the living room died the moment I walked in carrying a visibly distressed 8-year-old. 20 faces turned toward me, cocktails pausing halfway to lips, expressions shifting from celebration to confusion to something approaching shame. "Allison!" Mom's voice was artificially bright. "You're early. We weren't expecting you until tomorrow." I looked around the room slowly, taking in each face. Megan by the fireplace, Tyler and Madison nowhere to be seen, Dad near the kitchen, a beer in his hand, neighbors, family friends, people I'd known my whole life, all of them clearly aware that a party was happening while my son was locked away. "Where were your children during this party, Megan?" I asked, my voice eerily calm. "They're at Brad's sister's house for the weekend. We thought it would be easier." "Easier than what? Easier than acknowledging that you locked my son in the basement?" The room went dead silent. Someone coughed uncomfortably. A glass clinked against a table. "Now, Allison, that's not what happened," Mom started. But I cut her off. "My son has been in your basement for over 24 hours. While you threw a party. While you told me he was fine, he was playing with his cousins. He was too busy to talk to me." The silence stretched out, thick with tension and guilty looks exchanged between guests. Finally, Megan stepped forward, her face flushed with wine and embarrassment. "You're being dramatic, as usual," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Ethan just needed some quiet time. He was being difficult. Difficult? I adjusted Ethan's weight on my hip, feeling his small body still trembling. He's 8 years old. What exactly was so difficult about my 8-year-old son that required locking him in a basement? Dad cleared his throat, trying to restore his authority to the situation. "Allison, you're making a scene. These are family friends and you're embarrassing everyone." I almost laughed. After 32 years of being told I was embarrassing, dramatic, too sensitive, the word had lost its power over me. "I'm embarrassing everyone? My son was locked in your basement while you had a party. If anyone should be embarrassed, it's every adult in this room who knew where he was and did nothing." Mom stepped closer, lowering her voice to that manipulative tone she'd perfected over decades. "Sweetheart, you don't understand what happened. Ethan had a little tantrum yesterday and he needed to calm down. We were going to get him after the guests left." "A tantrum?" "He's been crying for his mother for over a day." "Children can be very manipulative," Megan added, crossing her arms defensively. "He was trying to get attention." I stared at my sister. This woman who'd had the benefit of 2 present parents, a stable marriage, financial security, everything handed to her, as she called my traumatized child manipulative. "You're right," I said quietly. Ethan was trying to get attention from his family, who locked him in a basement. The older woman I didn't recognize, probably one of Mom's book club friends, spoke up. Perhaps we should give the family privacy to work this out. Actually, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the room, I'd like witnesses for this. I looked directly at my mother. Mom, I need you to understand something very clearly. This is the last time you will ever see my son. This is the last time any of you will see him. Allison, you can't be serious. Dad's voice boomed. One incident doesn't mean... One incident? I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. You think this is about one incident? This is about 8 years of making my child feel unwanted. 8 years of treating him like a burden. 8 years of me watching you all barely tolerate his existence while I bent over backward trying to earn your approval. Ethan lifted his head from my shoulder, looking around the room with wide, scared eyes. These people had hurt him, but he was still young enough to hope they might apologize, might make it right. They didn't. Instead, Mom tried one more manipulation. Think about what you're doing to this family, Allison. Do you really want to tear everyone apart over a misunderstanding? I'm not tearing anything apart. I'm protecting my son from people who locked him in a basement. Then I delivered the information I'd kept secret for 3 years, the ace I'd never planned to play until this moment. And since family seems to be so important to everyone, you should know that Ethan inherited $200,000 from his great-grandfather on David's mother's side, money that was specifically left for his future, with me as the trustee until he turns 18. The room went completely still. I could practically hear the mental calculations happening. $200,000 that they'd never known about, never had access to, never would have access to. Money that none of you will ever touch, I continued, because none of you will ever see him again. I shifted Ethan higher on my hip and looked around the room one final time. Enjoy your party. The walk to my car felt like crossing a battlefield. Behind me, I could hear urgent whispered conversations starting up, voices rising in argument and blame. Ahead of me was something I'd never had before. Complete freedom from these people's opinions. The drive home was quiet, except for Ethan's occasional sniffles. I'd cranked up the heat in the car, but he was still shivering against me, processing what had happened as much as an 8-year-old could. Are we really never going to see Grandma again? He asked as we pulled into our driveway. Do you want to see her again? I asked gently. He thought about this seriously, the way children do when adults actually ask for their opinions. No, he said finally. She doesn't like me very much. She doesn't deserve you very much, I corrected, unlocking our front door. There's a difference. I drew him a warm bath and sat on the bathroom floor while he soaked, watching color slowly return to his cheeks. He told me more details about the past 3 days, how Tyler and Madison had been allowed to order pizza while he ate peanut butter sandwiches, how Megan had told him he couldn't play with their toys because he didn't know how to take care of nice things. Why didn't you tell me all this when I called? I asked. Grandma said I couldn't talk to you because you were working, and I shouldn't bother you with whining. Each new detail felt like a knife twist, but also like vindication. My instincts had been right. My son's discomfort around my family had been completely justified. After I tucked him into his own bed, in his own room, surrounded by his own books and toys and the elephant David had given him, I sat in my living room and really looked at my life for the first time in years. The house was small but warm, filled with pictures of Ethan and me at parks, museums, school events. My furniture might not be expensive, but it was chosen with care and arranged for actual living, not for impressing visitors. The kitchen held evidence of real meals cooked for 2 people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. This was already a better life than anything my family could offer. My phone buzzed with the first of what would be many calls, Mom's name on the screen. I declined the call and blocked the number. Megan next. Blocked. Dad. Blocked. Each blocked contact felt like removing a weight from my shoulders. Over the next few weeks, the transformation in Ethan was remarkable. His appetite returned. He laughed more easily. He stopped the nervous habit of looking around before speaking, stopped the careful way he'd been measuring his words to avoid causing offense. Mom, he said one morning over breakfast, I like our family better when it's just us. Me too, baby. The freedom was intoxicating. No more family dinners where I served everyone else and cleaned up alone. No more birthday parties where Ethan felt excluded. No more holidays spent watching my child absorb the message that he was somehow less than his cousins. Instead, we had lazy Saturday mornings, impromptu ice cream trips, movie nights where we actually enjoyed each other's company. We had space to breathe, to be ourselves, to build something better. 3 weeks later, my boss called me into his office. The New York client had specifically requested that I lead their next project, a 9-month engagement that would mean a significant promotion and salary increase. They were impressed with your problem-solving abilities, he said, And honestly, Allison, you've been carrying more responsibility than your title reflects for a while now. It's time we made it official. Senior project manager, a corner office, a 30% salary increase, the promotion I'd been working toward for 3 years. As I sat in my new office that evening, looking out at the city skyline, I realized something profound. Cutting toxic people out of my life hadn't diminished me. It had created space for me to grow into who I was supposed to be all along. My family had taught me that my worth was conditional, that love had to be earned through perfect behavior and constant sacrifice. But they were wrong. Love, real love, was what I had with Ethan. Unconditional, protective, nurturing, the kind of love that would never lock a child in a basement. The kind of love that builds people up instead of tearing them down. The kind of love that was worth protecting at any cost. And I was just getting started. My name is Allison, and 3 months after cutting ties with my family, I'm sitting in what used to be my boss's office, staring at a nameplate that now reads, Allison Morgan, Senior Project Manager. The promotion came faster than I'd ever imagined possible. Turns out, when you're not spending every weekend at obligatory family functions and every evening managing other people's emotional crises, you have remarkable amounts of mental energy for actual work. Who would have thought? The New York client specifically requested you for their expansion project. My former boss, now colleague, explained during my promotion meeting. They said your problem-solving approach saved them millions in potential delays. The salary increase was substantial, enough to finally stop living paycheck to paycheck, enough to start thinking about the future instead of just surviving the present. But more importantly, it represented something I'd never had before. Recognition for my actual abilities rather than my willingness to sacrifice myself for others. Ethan noticed the change in me immediately. Where I'd once been exhausted and stressed every evening, I now had energy for homework help, bedtime stories, and weekend adventures. We started taking Saturday trips to museums, parks, places I'd always been too tired to explore when I was constantly managing my family's emotional needs. Mom, you're different, he said one evening as we built a blanket fort in the living room. Different how? Happier. Like not worried all the time. Out of the mouths of babes. I hadn't realized how much my anxiety about my family had been affecting him. Children absorb everything, and for 8 years he'd been watching me navigate constant stress and criticism. Now he was seeing what I looked like when I wasn't perpetually braced for the next family crisis. The blocked phone numbers stayed blocked. Occasionally, I'd get calls from numbers I didn't recognize, but I'd developed a strict policy. If someone couldn't identify themselves and state their business clearly, I hung up. Amazing how much peace this simple boundary created. My friend Sarah had been right all along. You look 10 years younger, she said when we met for coffee. I didn't realize how much that situation was aging you. I'd been carrying stress in my shoulders, my jaw, my stomach for so long that I'd forgotten what relaxation felt like. Now, for the first time in years, I slept through the night without waking up worried about some family emergency that would somehow become my responsibility. The house hunting started almost by accident. Ethan's school was decent, but I'd always known there were better options in different neighborhoods. With my new salary, those options suddenly became possible. Are we moving because we don't like our house? Ethan asked when I mentioned looking at different areas. We're moving because we can do better now, I explained, because we deserve better. The house I found was everything our current place wasn't. Spacious, bright, in an excellent school district, with a big backyard where Ethan could play safely. It cost exactly what I could afford with my new salary. No family money needed, no favors required. Standing in the empty master bedroom during our final walkthrough, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete ownership of my life. This house was mine because I'd earned it. The mortgage was mine because my credit qualified for it. The future was mine because I'd chosen it. This is really ours? Ethan asked, his voice echoing in the empty living room. Really ours, I confirmed. No one can take it away from us, and no one else gets to make decisions about it. He grinned and ran through the empty rooms, his footsteps loud on the hardwood floors. This was what freedom sounded like. A child playing without fear, without walking on eggshells, without worrying about disturbing adults who barely tolerated his presence. The move itself was surprisingly emotional. As I packed up our old life, I kept finding reminders of the person I used to be. Thank you cards from my family for loans I'd never been repaid for. Photos from gatherings where I looked tired and stressed. Gifts from Christmases where I'd given generously and received practical items that showed how little my family understood my interests or desires. I threw most of it away. The person who had needed their approval was gone. The person moving into this new house had different priorities. What do you think happens to people who are mean to kids? Ethan asked on our first night in the new house, as I tucked him into his new bedroom. I think they miss out on knowing amazing people. I answered honestly. And eventually, they end up lonely. Good, he said with 8-year-old certainty. They should be lonely if they're mean. As I turned off his light and headed to my own room, I realized he was right. My family had chosen their priorities, and those priorities didn't include treating my son with basic kindness. Now they could live with the consequences of that choice. I was done protecting them from the natural results of their own behavior. The new school was everything I'd hoped for and more. Westfield Elementary had small class sizes, engaged teachers, and a culture that celebrated different kinds of intelligence. For Ethan, who'd always been more interested in building things than sitting still, it was like finding water in the desert. "Mom, guess what?" He burst through the front door on his 3rd day. "Mrs. Peterson said I can help design the class garden project." Watching him bloom in an environment where his curiosity was encouraged rather than suppressed made every extra dollar of the mortgage payment worth it. He'd always been bright, but he'd learned to hide it around my family, where being too smart was seen as showing off. Here, intelligence was celebrated. Creativity was nurtured. Children were seen as individuals rather than inconveniences. The contrast became even clearer when Ethan's teacher, Mrs. Peterson, called me in for a conference. "I wanted to discuss Ethan's adjustment," she said, but her expression was positive, not concerned. My stomach clenched automatically. Years of conditioning from my family had taught me to expect criticism about my parenting. "Is there a problem?" "Oh no, quite the opposite. He's extraordinarily bright and creative, but it seems like he spent a long time hiding those qualities. He's just starting to let himself shine academically. I wanted to ask about enrichment opportunities." I nearly cried right there in her classroom. When had anyone ever talked about enrichment for my son? My family had been so busy pointing out his supposed shortcomings that no one had ever noticed his strengths. "What would you recommend?" I asked, pulling myself together. "There's an advanced math program, a science club, and a creative writing workshop. He's shown interest in all 3 areas. Advanced programs, science clubs, creative writing, things that cost money, required parental involvement, and assumed that a child's potential was worth investing in." "Let's do all of them," I said without hesitation. Mrs. Peterson smiled. "He's lucky to have such a supportive mother." The words hit differently than they would have 6 months ago. Back then, I would have deflected, made excuses, explained all the ways I was inadequate. Now I simply said, "Thank you," because it was true. I was a good mother. I'd always been a good mother. I'd just been surrounded by people who needed me to believe otherwise. At work, my success was creating new opportunities faster than I could process them. The client who'd requested me for the expansion project was so pleased with the results that they offered me a consulting contract for their West Coast operations. "It would mean some travel," my boss explained, "but the compensation package is significant." Significant turned out to be nearly double my current salary for a 6-month project. The old Allison would have immediately worried about the impact on Ethan, would have found reasons why I couldn't possibly take such an opportunity. The new Allison made 2 phone calls, one to my neighbor who ran a small childcare business, and one to Mrs. Peterson to discuss how to maintain Ethan's academic momentum if we moved temporarily to California. Both conversations were positive. Amazing how much easier life becomes when you're surrounded by competent, supportive people instead of those who view your success as a threat to their own identity. "Are you excited about seeing the ocean?" I asked Ethan as we looked at pictures of the temporary housing the company would provide. "Are we really going to live by the beach? For 6 months, think you can handle that?" His grin was answer enough. That evening, as I updated my LinkedIn profile with my new title and upcoming project, I thought about the person I'd been a year ago. She would never have believed this life was possible. She would have found reasons why she didn't deserve these opportunities, why taking them would be selfish, why other people's needs should come first. But that person had been operating under false assumptions about what family meant, what love looked like, what she owed to people who took without giving. This person, the one sitting in her own house, planning a career move that would benefit her child's future, making decisions based on what was best for her family of 2. This person knew better. The doorbell rang as I was closing my laptop. Through the window, I could see a delivery truck pulling away and a package on the front steps. Inside the box was a photo album I'd ordered, pictures from our first 3 months in the new house. Ethan at his new school's science fair, proudly displaying his volcano project. Both of us at the beach during a weekend trip, genuinely smiling for the first time I could remember. Me in my new office, looking confident and professional. Not a single photo included my extended family. And for the first time, that felt like victory rather than loss. The California project exceeded every expectation I'd had. Working with the West Coast team taught me skills I'd never developed in my previous role, expanded my network beyond anything I'd imagined possible, and confirmed something I'd begun to suspect. I was genuinely good at this work. Not just competent, not just reliable, actually talented. You have an instinct for seeing around corners, the project director told me during our final review. You anticipate problems before they become crises and identify opportunities others miss. 6 months ago, I would have deflected the compliment. Now I simply said, thank you. I enjoy the strategic thinking aspect of this work. The West Coast salary had been transformative. For the first time in my adult life, I had actual savings. Not the emergency fund I'd been building and depleting for family crises, but real money set aside for Ethan's future, for our security, for possibilities I was just beginning to imagine. Ethan thrived in the California school system. The academic programs were even more advanced than what we'd found at Westfield. And the diversity of the student body meant he was exposed to ideas and perspectives that would serve him well for the rest of his life. I want to be an environmental engineer, he announced one evening as we walked along the beach near our temporary home. That's a great goal. What made you think of that? My science teacher said engineers solve problems to make people's lives better. And I like figuring out how things work. 8 years old, and he already had clearer career vision than I'd had at 28. That's what happened when a child grew up believing his ideas mattered, his interests were valid, his potential was worth nurturing. The return to our permanent home felt different than I'd expected. The house that had seemed so spacious and perfect 6 months ago now felt small, not physically, but in terms of possibilities. I found myself browsing real estate listings, not because I was unhappy, but because I was curious about what else might be available. What other neighborhoods might offer even better schools? What other opportunities might exist for someone with my newly expanded skills and significantly improved financial position? Are we moving again? Ethan asked, catching me looking at house listings on my laptop. Just exploring options, I said. Nothing definite. I like our house, he said, but without anxiety. He'd learned over the past year that my decisions were made with his best interests in mind. If we moved, it would be to something better, not because of someone else's crisis or demand. The permanency of that trust hit me unexpectedly. Ethan felt secure with me in a way I'd never felt secure with my own family. He knew that his needs mattered, that his comfort was a priority, that he wouldn't be sacrificed for someone else's convenience. I'd broken the cycle. Whatever dysfunction I'd inherited from my family's treatment of me, I hadn't passed it on to him. The phone rang as I was making dinner, interrupting my thoughts. Unknown number, which usually meant I wouldn't answer. But something made me pick up this time. Allison? It's Aunt Patricia, my father's sister, someone I'd always liked but rarely spoke with. Someone who'd been at family gatherings but never part of the core drama. Hi, Patricia. How are you? I'm fine, honey. I was calling because, well, I heard about what happened with your mother and Megan, about the party and what they did to Ethan. I waited. I'd learned to be comfortable with silence, to let other people fill it rather than rushing to smooth over awkwardness. I wanted you to know that what they did was wrong, completely wrong, and I understand why you cut contact. Thank you for saying that. I also wanted you to know that not everyone in the family agrees with how they handled things. Some of us think you made the right decision. It was the validation I'd never expected to receive. For months, I'd wondered if I was overreacting, if I was being too harsh, if I was depriving Ethan of family connections that might be valuable despite their flaws. I appreciate you calling, Patricia. If you ever want to talk, or if Ethan wants to know about his father's family, I'm here. No pressure. No agenda. Just, if you want. After I hung up, I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the life I'd built for myself and my son, and felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete confidence in my decisions. I wasn't missing out on something by refusing to tolerate abuse. I wasn't depriving Ethan of essential family connections by protecting him from people who treated him poorly. I was building something better, something healthier, something that honored both of us as whole, valuable people deserving of respect and love. And I was just getting started. The first call came on a Tuesday morning, exactly 14 months after I'd walked out of my mother's party carrying my son. Unknown number, which I almost didn't answer, but the timing felt wrong somehow. Too early for marketing calls, too late for East Coast business. Allison, it's Megan. I nearly hung up immediately, but curiosity won. What could my sister possibly want after more than a year of silence? What do you want? Megan? We need to talk. It's about Dad's business. There it was. Not an apology for what they'd done to Ethan. Not concern for how we were doing. Business. Money. The only thing that had ever really mattered to my family. I don't see what Dad's business has to do with me. Allison, please, can we meet for coffee? Just for an hour? The desperation in her voice was new. Megan had never sounded desperate before. Entitled, demanding, condescending, yes, but never desperate. Why? Because things are bad, Allison. Really bad. Against my better judgment, or maybe because I was curious to see exactly how bad things had gotten, I agreed to meet her at a neutral location downtown, a coffee shop near my office where I could easily leave if the conversation went sideways. Megan looked different when she walked in, older, stressed, her usual perfect appearance slightly frayed around the edges. Her handbag, which used to be replaced seasonally, was showing wear. Her hair, usually perfectly colored and styled, had grown out roots. "Thank you for coming," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "You have 1 hour," I replied, not offering any polite small talk. "Dad's company is in trouble. Real trouble." I waited for her to continue, not giving her the satisfaction of asking questions. "The commercial construction market has been brutal the last 2 years. 3 of his biggest clients went under without paying their final invoices. The bank is threatening to call in his line of credit." Still waiting. "We're going to lose everything, Allison. The business. Maybe even Mom and Dad's house." "That's unfortunate," I said evenly. Megan stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. "Unfortunate? Allison, this is our family's livelihood we're talking about. Your family's livelihood. I'm not part of that family anymore, remember? You made that very clear when you locked my 8-year-old son in a basement. That was a misunderstanding." "No, Megan, that was child abuse. And the fact that you still call it a misunderstanding is exactly why we're never going to have a relationship again." Her composure cracked slightly. "Fine. You want to hold a grudge forever? That's your choice. But Ethan is still family. He's still Dad's grandson. Ethan is my son. His family is me. The people who treated him like an inconvenience don't get to claim family status when they need something. You know he inherited money from David's family?" There it was. The real reason for this meeting. "What about it?" "I did some research after you mentioned it at the party. $200,000 could save Dad's business. It could save everything." I almost laughed at the audacity. "You want me to use my son's inheritance to bail out the business owned by people who locked him in a basement? We could structure it as a loan." "No, you didn't let me finish. I don't need you to finish." "The answer is no. Now, always, and forever." Megan's mask finally slipped completely. "You selfish bitch. After everything this family has done for you." "What exactly has this family done for me, Megan? Please be specific." "We raised you. We supported you. You raised me to be your emotional support system and financial safety net. You supported me when it benefited you and abandoned me when I needed help. That's not family. That's exploitation. You were always jealous of me," she snapped, reverting to childhood tactics. "Always resentful because I was more successful. You were more successful because I sacrificed my opportunities to enable yours. But I'm not jealous anymore, Megan, because now I know what actual success feels like and it doesn't require stepping on other people to achieve it." I stood up, gathering my purse. "Give Mom and Dad my regards. Tell them I hope they enjoy the consequences of their choices." "Allison, wait. We're done here. Don't contact me again." As I walked back to my office, I felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. Not for their financial situation, which was largely the result of their own poor decisions, but for the fact that they'd spent so many years taking for granted something valuable and now had to face the reality of life without it. They'd lost me. They'd lost access to Ethan. And they'd lost the financial safety net I'd provided for decades. All because they couldn't treat my child with basic human decency. The irony was delicious. The second approach came 3 weeks later, not from Megan, but from my father. He showed up at my office building, somehow having discovered where I worked despite my never telling them about my promotion or my new position. Security called me down to the lobby. "There's a gentleman here who says he's your father. Should I send him up?" "No," I said immediately. "I'll come down." Dad was standing near the information desk, looking smaller than I remembered, older. The confidence and authority that had dominated my childhood seemed diminished, replaced by something that looked almost defeated. "Hello, Allison. Dad, how did you find out where I work? Does it matter?" "It matters that you're showing up uninvited to my workplace. I could have you escorted out. Please, just give me 5 minutes." Against my better judgment, I gestured toward a seating area near the windows. Far enough from the elevators that my colleagues wouldn't see us, but public enough that he couldn't make a scene. "Megan said you refused to help." Megan was right. "Allison, I'm asking you to reconsider. This business has been my life's work. 3 generations of Morgan men have built something meaningful here. And 3 generations of Morgan men have managed to run it into the ground without my help. I don't see why that should be my problem now. Because family helps family." The words that had controlled me for 30 years. The words I'd finally learned to recognize as manipulation, rather than truth. When did you help me, Dad? When I was working 2 jobs to pay for Megan's college expenses. When I was caring for your grandchild alone after David died. When I needed childcare for 3 days and ended up with my son locked in your basement? That wasn't... You didn't mean to traumatize my child? You didn't mean to lock him away while you threw a party? You didn't mean to ignore his cries for help? Dad's face flushed red. We made a mistake. People make mistakes, Allison. Some mistakes are forgivable. Others reveal who people really are. So you're going to let your pride destroy our family business? I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply refusing to save you from the consequences of your own actions. This isn't just about me, he said, his voice rising slightly. This is about your mother, about Megan's children, about people who never cared about my child's well-being, about people who saw my son as disposable, about people who are suddenly interested in family loyalty now that they need something. We could structure it so Ethan benefits too, a partnership arrangement. Stop. My voice was sharp enough to cut through his desperation. You're talking about my 8-year-old son like he's a business asset. Do you even hear yourself? I'm trying to save what 3 generations built. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you treated your grandson like garbage. Dad leaned back in his chair, finally understanding that his usual tactics weren't working. The entitled demand, the guilt manipulation, the family loyalty card, none of it was landing. What do you want from us? He asked finally. Nothing. I want absolutely nothing from any of you. That's what you never understood. I stopped needing your approval a long time ago. So that's it? You're just going to walk away and let everything fall apart? I walked away 14 months ago. You're just now noticing because you finally need something you can't get anywhere else. I stood up, straightening my jacket. The expensive one I'd bought with my California project bonus. The one that made me feel confident and professional and worthy of respect. Good luck with the business. Dad, I hope you figure something out. Allison, please. I have a meeting to get back to. Don't come to my workplace again. As I walked toward the elevators, I heard him call out one last desperate attempt. Think about what your grandmother would have wanted. I stopped, turned around, and looked at him with something approaching sympathy. Grandma would have wanted you to treat your great-grandson with love and respect. She would have been horrified by what you did to him, and she would have been proud of me for choosing his well-being over your business. The elevator doors closed on whatever he might have said next. That evening, I sat in my beautiful living room, in the house I'd bought with money I'd earned, watching Ethan work on homework for the advanced science program he loved, and felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete certainty. I'd made the right choice. For him, for me, for the future we were building together. And I wasn't even slightly tempted to change my mind. The news of my family's bankruptcy reached me through Patricia, my father's sister, who called 6 months later to let me know the inevitable had finally happened. The business closed last month, she said gently. Your parents are selling the house. Megan and Brad are getting divorced. Apparently the financial stress was too much for their marriage. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not sadness, just a kind of neutral acknowledgement that actions had led to consequences, exactly as they always do. How are you handling all this? Patricia asked. I'm fine, I said honestly. This doesn't really affect us. And Ethan, how is he? I looked out my kitchen window where my son was building an elaborate fort in our backyard, his friends from the neighborhood helping him engineer something that looked like it belonged in a science museum. He's thriving. He made the honor roll again this semester, and his science teacher says he's the most creative problem solver she's ever taught. I'm glad. You did the right thing, protecting him from all this. After Patricia hung up, I found myself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought us here. 3 years ago, I'd been drowning in my family's dysfunction, sacrificing my son's well-being and my own happiness to maintain relationships with people who saw us as useful rather than valuable. Now I was sitting in a house I owned outright. The California project had been so successful that I'd been able to make a massive principal payment, planning Ethan's summer enrichment program and my own vacation to Europe. Our first real vacation, just the 2 of us, with no family obligations or expectations. Mom, Ethan called from the backyard, can Marcus sleep over tomorrow? His mom said it's okay if you say yes. Of course, I called back. And can we make those chocolate chip pancakes for breakfast? Absolutely. Simple pleasures, normal childhood experiences. The things my family had made complicated through their need for drama and control. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Through the peephole, I could see a man in a business suit. Definitely not a delivery or a neighbor. Mrs. Morgan? I'm James Mitchell from Patterson, Burke & Associates. I represent your father's estate. Estate? I'm sorry, what estate? Perhaps I could come in? There are some legal matters we need to discuss. 20 minutes later, I was staring at documents that revealed a truth my family had hidden from me for 33 years. My grandfather, my father's father, had left a substantial trust fund specifically for me. Money that had been growing with compound interest for over 3 decades. Money that my father had been legally required to turn over to me when I reached 25. Money that would have changed everything about my life, about my choices, about the power dynamics that had controlled our family for so long. Your father violated his fiduciary duty by not informing you of this inheritance, Mr. Mitchell explained. The trust is worth approximately $1.2 million now. I stared at the numbers on the page, trying to process what this meant. My grandfather had provided for my independence decades ago. He'd seen something in the family dynamics that worried him enough to ensure I would always have options. And my father had stolen those options from me by hiding their existence. What happens now? I asked. The estate is in bankruptcy proceedings, but this trust was never part of your father's assets. It belongs to you free and clear. There will be some paperwork, but you should have access to the funds within 30 days. After Mr. Mitchell left, I sat in my living room trying to absorb what had just happened. Financial security beyond anything I'd imagined. The ability to give Ethan opportunities I'd never dreamed possible. Freedom from ever having to worry about job security or family emergencies or any of the fears that had shaped my adult life. But more than the money, there was something else. Validation. My grandfather had seen the family patterns clearly enough to try to protect me from them. He'd known that I would need an escape route, a way to be independent, resources that no one else could control or take away. "Mom, you look weird," Ethan said, coming in from the backyard with grass stains on his knees and dirt under his fingernails. Good weird or bad weird? Happy weird, I think. I pulled him into a hug. This boy who'd survived his own family trauma and come out stronger, more confident, more secure in his worth than I'd been at his age. "How would you like to go to space camp this summer?" "Really? Real space camp. Real space camp. And after that, how would you like to visit Europe?" "Just us? Just us." His grin was worth more than any inheritance, any business success, any family approval I'd ever sought. 2 years later, I was sitting in the audience at Ethan's middle school science fair, watching him explain his project on renewable energy systems to a panel of impressed judges, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Megan. Mom's in the hospital. I thought you should know." I looked at the message for a moment, then deleted it without responding. Some bridges, once burned, should stay burned. Some relationships, once ended, should remain ended. I had built something better from the ashes of that old life, something healthier, stronger, more authentic, something that honored both my son and myself as complete, valuable human beings deserving of love and respect. I watched Ethan win first place in his category and felt something I'd never experienced in my first 30 years. Complete contentment with the choices I'd made. We drove home to our house, our life, our future. All of it earned, all of it chosen, all of it ours. And finally, after all these years, I was free.